"You're carrying a weapon RHOA. That's what Karen screeched at my wife, who was just quietly reading by the lake. And what makes this entire incident truly outrageous, this woman was so sure of herself that she dragged my wife to court over it. We're talking full-blown lawsuit, lawyers, hearings, paperwork, the whole legal circus. She really believed she was going to take down some no-name government employee and be crowned the community's savior. But there was one tiny little detail about my wife she didn't know, something that would flip the courtroom on its head in the most dramatic, glorious way possible. Welcome to Anna Drama Nesta. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from, because what happened next turned our entire world upside down. Let me set the scene. Before all of this madness started, life was peaceful, serene, even. I'm Alan, 35, working in IT and always fascinated by human behavior, which is probably why this story intrigued me so much even while I was in the thick of it. My wife, Rebecca, 32, is brilliant. She works a government job she always described as mind-numbing paperwork, data entry, budget meetings. You know, the kind of stuff that makes your brain go numb. She'd come home rattling off stories about form numbers and policy changes, and honestly, after about 30 seconds, I'd tune out. It was like listening to a documentary about grass growing. Rebecca was the quiet type, the kind of person who avoids drama at all costs, blends into crowds, and just wants to spend time with her family. She posted generic pics of government buildings online, griped about endless filing, and seemed like the most unassuming person you could ever meet. Our daughter, Laura, she's 5, was the heart of our home. This bubbly, curious little girl who had the entire Pine Lake community wrapped around her finger within a week of moving in. She was the reason we chose this place. We wanted her to grow up in a calm, safe environment far from the madness of city life, and Pine Lake, it seemed like paradise. That ice-broken bar until we met our nightmare neighbor. The community had about 50 lovely cabins surrounding a sparkling lake, where the biggest problems were usually petty, as someone's dock creeping over the line, or who played music too loud on Sunday afternoons. We'd been living there 6 months, minding our business and enjoying the peace. Then we crossed paths with Marianne Stone. And wow, where do I even begin? She was 58, a retired elementary school principal who had turned her post-retirement life into a full-time HOA crusade. Picture this: tall, thin, platinum blonde hair that was definitely salon-level polished, dressed like she had a standing golf date with a senator even when grabbing the mail. Marianne had eyes like a hawk, cold, calculating. She knew everything happening in the neighborhood before it even happened. And don't even get me started on the cameras, if she had them pointing in every direction around her massive cabin, like she was running a miniature surveillance bunker. But here's the thing, her paranoia wasn't entirely baseless. 3 years ago, she was the victim of a terrifying home invasion. Burglars broke in while she was still inside. One of them pointed what she believed was a gun at her. That moment left her deeply shaken. Since then, Marianne's mission in life had become identifying every potential threat or imagined in Pine Lake. She morphed into the neighborhood enforcer from hell. She kept spreadsheets, literal spreadsheets of resident violations. She loved catching people slipping up, and she didn't hesitate to use community pressure and legal intimidation to push people out. She'd driven off 2 families already. To be fair, she had caught some real issues in the past. The Johnsons built a deck without approval. The Martinez family hosted too many loud parties. And somehow she always knew who was behind on HOA before the board did. That track record gave her power, and worse, it made people trust her when she pointed fingers. So when she set her sights on us, things got ugly, fast. It all kicked off on a picture-perfect Saturday in late spring. The lake shimmered like glass, kids' laughter echoed from the docks, and parents sipped drinks on their decks under the sun. Rebecca had set up a wooden chair on our small patch of lawn, about 20 feet from the water, with her favorite book in hand. After a long week of what I thought was just another mountain of government paperwork, she was finally relaxing. She had her usual black crossbody work bag with here nothing special. It was a typical office purse, rectangular, maybe big enough for a laptop, and some folders. She placed it on the grass beside her chair while she read. What we didn't know, Marianne was watching from her cabin with binoculars. "Yeah, so you read that right." She was literally spying on us from across the lake, crouched behind her window with high-powered lenses like we were fugitives, and somehow, through that glass and paranoia-tinted perspective, she looked at Rebecca's workbag and thought she saw something else. Maybe the lighting played tricks on her, maybe part of the bag was obscured. Whatever the case, Marianne jumped to the worst conclusion imaginable. Here's the thing about people with unresolved trauma: once they latch onto a fear, they become absolutely convinced it's real. Facts be damned. So while I was inside fixing lunch for our daughter, I suddenly heard shouting outside, raised voices, one clearly agitated, the other calm but confused. And just like that, our peaceful day by the lake exploded into chaos. I could hear voices outside, one calm, one absolutely unhinged. I dropped everything I was doing and ran to the window. What I saw felt like something straight out of a fever dream. Marianne had stormed across the shared community space, marched right up to Rebecca, and was now practically shouting in her fascia, pointing at my wife's work bag like it was some kind of live explosive. Rebecca, still seated in her chair with a paperback in one hand, looked genuinely confused. She gestured toward the bag, clearly trying to explain something simple to someone who was completely detached from reality. Things escalated faster than I could wrap my head around. Marianne was yelling, "You brought a weapon into our community." I saw it. "Don't even try to lie." Rebecca, ever the composed Onia, didn't panic. She responded with that same puzzled tone, saying, "What? That's just my work bag." But Marianne wasn't hearing any of it. She launched into some deranged rant about concealed weapons and neighborhood safety, treating my wife like she was a threat to national security. "Don't act innocent. I saw something shaped like a gun," she screamed, her voice growing more shrill by the second. Trying to diffuse things, Rebecca calmly opened the bag just enough to reveal its contents. "It's my laptop, some files." "That's it." But instead of calming down, Marianne recoiled like my wife had just pulled out a grenade. "I know a concealed weapon when I see one. You can't trick me," she shouted, eyes wild. By the time I made it outside, Marianne had gone full Karen, and I mean full-blown meltdown mode. She was flailing her arms like a deranged conductor, ranting that government employees were the real threat, that she was going to have us arrested, sued, and thrown out of the community. "Government workers are the most dangerous. I'm calling the police and filing charges," she shrieked, spit flying from her mouth. Rebecca, still seated, just gave this little amused smiley like she wasn't scared at all. If anything, she seemed entertained, and that should have been my first clue. There was clearly more to my wife than boring spreadsheets and paperwork. I stepped in, trying to reason with the madness. "Hey, what's going on here?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Marianne spun toward me like a missile locked on target. She pointed at me like I was part of a secret plot. "She's carrying illegal weapons, and you're helping her. You're both getting evicted," she roared, red-faced and frothing with rage. Rebecca looked at me, baffled but calm, and said, "She thinks my work bag is a gun." I blinked. "Babby broken bar, just show her your laptop." Rebecca gave a small shrug. I tried. "She's not interested in logic." Eventually, Marianne stormed off, but not before leaving behind a handwritten note that read like it was pulled from a courtroom drama. She'd actually drafted a formal demand for immediate weapon removal, threatening legal action if we didn't comply. The language was so over the top, it almost made it sound like Rebecca was running an arms-dealing ring out of our lakeside home. After she finally left, I turned to Rebecca expecting her to be furious, or at least rattled. But she just gave a small shrug, and this calm, analytical look crossed her fascia, something I'd never seen before. That's when it hit me. Maybe my sweet, quiet, paperwork-obsessed wife wasn't as soft as she appeared. That night, after Laura was tucked into bed, I sat down with Rebecca and asked the obvious question, "Why didn't you just show her your government ID? That would have ended it on the spot." She looked me dead in the eyes, her tone steady but serious. "Alan, I can't disclose my real position to nosy neighbors. There are protocols for a reason, and sometimes people need to learn the hard way." Then she picked up her phone and made a quiet, professional. She spoke clearly, referencing a personal matter that required legal support. Her voice was calm, confident, almost like I was hearing a different person. And in that moment, I started to wonder, what kind of government job was so classified that even your neighbor thinking you were armed didn't justify an explanation? Drop your guesses in the comments. Seriously, what do you think Rebecca really does for a living? Because I was about to find out a broken bar the hard way. Now, you'd think after something that bizarre, things would settle down, that the moment would blow over, fade into one of those ridiculous remember when neighborhood stories. Nope, I severely underestimated Marianne. She wasn't backing off, not even close. Her paranoia kicked into high gear. Her trauma-fueled obsession went from overreaction to full-scale investigation. Overnight, she morphed into some kind of amateur private investigator. And I'm not exaggerating when I say her new mission in life was to ruin Rebecca. The very next morning, I caught her outside with this comically large camera lens, snapping pictures of our cabin from across the street like she was gathering evidence for a true crime documentary. Marianne wasn't just taking photos anymore, she was building a full-blown case file like she was leading a major federal investigation. When I waved at her from the porch, she didn't even flinch. No shame, no embarrassment. She just kept clicking away with that oversized lens like she had every right to document every second of our lives. But what really floored me wasn't just her boldness, it was how disturbingly organized she became over the next few weeks. Her research was methodical, intensely broken bar, and completely detached from reality. She spent hours every day digging through the internet, scouring any public record she could get her hands on related to Rebecca. And eventually, she found something in Rebecca's professional bio. It listed her as a government office worker focused on filing and data entry, basically the least threatening job title you could imagine. But Marianne, she twisted that bland description into what she saw as ironclad proof that my wife was a deep state menace with a concealed weapon habit. She muttered endlessly about how government workers saw themselves as untouchable, how low-level clerks were the real danger because they hide in plain sight. She seriously believed filing forms all day was just a cover for something sinister. It was like watching someone build a fantasy world out of absolutely nothing. Marianne went all in. She printed out dozens of grainy surveillance photos, carefully cropped and zoomed in to make Rebecca's perfectly ordinary bag look ominous and threatening. She even manipulated shadows and lighting to give it a more weapon-like profile. And that wasn't all. She created detailed diagrams with arrows and labels like she was briefing Homeland Security. She documented every mundane thing Rebecca did with that bag, carrying it to and from the house, sitting near it on the lawn, leaving it inside during the daytime when heaven forbid a children might be present. To Marianne, this wasn't just hoe drama anymore. It was a mission to stop what she thought was a covert threat to national safety. And she didn't stop at building evidence. She started recruiting backup. Marianne formed what she proudly dubbed the Pine Lake Safety Committee, a small group of neighbors she personally convinced to join her cause. Mrs. Ashley, who lived 2 cabins over, was one of them. She later admitted Marianne had once helped her resolve a messy property line dispute and probably felt like she owed her a favor. Others likely joined out of fear of being the next target if they didn't go along. Marianne was a master manipulator. She kept reminding people how she'd been right before, how she caught rule breakers, exposed violations, and stood up to past community threats. She's just a clerk, she'd scoff. Thinks she can intimidate me? I've been keeping this place safe for years. She believed in her case so much that she dipped into her retirement savings to hire a high-powered attorney. This'll pay off, she told neighbors confidently. Once I win damages, it'll all be worth it. Meanwhile, Rebecca played her role to absolute perfection, and I had no idea it was all part of something much bigger. She acted like she was genuinely rattled, like she was just an innocent bureaucrat caught in a neighborhood nightmare. Her expression was always weary, stressed but not dramatic. She told neighbors she didn't understand why Marianne was so angry. All I do is process forms, she'd say in the most bewildered, helpless tone. Her online presence, pure government drone. She'd post things like, "Another day, another stack of reports," or "When will the filing end?" with exhausted emojis. Anyone who saw her feed would think she lived the dullest life imaginable. At home, she'd talk to me about possibly needing a lawyer. She seemed anxious, overwhelmed me like the idea of a lawsuit was too much to handle. But behind the scenes, there were quiet, calculated moves I didn't recognize for what they were. Rebecca would step outside to take phone calls, speaking in hushed, firm tones. I assumed it was just office politics or stressful coworkers. When I asked, she'd brush it off with a sigh and say, "Compliance issue is a broken bar, you know how it is." I didn't question it. In my head, she was just an overworked perfectionist or someone who took spreadsheets and internal audits way too seriously. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. I mean, what kind of filing clerk has late-night phone calls about compliance emergencies? But at the time, government work just seemed so broken bar boring, so forgettable. I never dug any deeper, and while I stayed oblivious, Marianne's neighborhood crusade kept growing. It hit its peak just before everything blew wide open. Marianne finally pulled the trigger on what she had clearly been planning for weeks: a surprise emergency home meeting on a Wednesday night. And let me tell you, she was ready. The community room was packed, and she stood at the front like a prosecutor delivering the final argument in a high-profile trial. She had props, enlarged photos, printed statements, everything but a gavel. She moved through her so-called evidence with theatrical confidence, waving around grainy pictures and quoting witness notes like she was unveiling a nationwide scandal. "This isn't the first time I've protected Pine Lake," she declared. "I exposed the Johnsons' unauthorized renovations. I put an end to the Martinez family's constant parties. You trusted me, they trust me now. When I see a threat, I act." Then came the dramatic reveal of her case file: timelines, diagrams, blurry surveillance photos, all pointing to one absurd conclusion: that Rebecca was a government agent using her position to intimidate law-abiding citizens. It was like watching someone present a PowerPoint on aliens living among us. Even Mrs. Ashley spoke up, although you could tell she didn't want to be there. Her voice shook as she vaguely confirmed seeing something suspicious, clearly uncomfortable with being pulled into Marianne's crusade. Rebecca? She was brilliant. She attended the meeting and played her part flawlessly, appearing overwhelmed, nervous, and unsure of how to defend herself against such ridiculous accusations. She gave simple, non-confrontational answers. She looked exactly like the person Marianne had painted her as, a quiet desk worker who suddenly found herself at the center of a wildfire she didn't understand. The mood in the room was tense. You could almost feel the community split in two, around 60% swayed by Marianne's performance or simply too afraid to oppose her. The rest were quiet, either unconvinced or unwilling to take sides against someone with a reputation for destroying her enemies. And in that moment, I felt something dark creep in, that same fear others had felt. We were next, family number 3 in Marianne's history of forced evictions. I had no idea how we could stop her, but then she made the one mistake that would cost her everything. She went after our daughter. Marianne's new safety protocol banned children from any household under community investigation from participating in HOA-sponsored events. When Laura came home crying because she wasn't allowed to attend the upcoming summer festival, I saw something flicker in Rebecca's eyes, as something cold and unfamiliar. It vanished just as quickly, but for that brief moment, I realized there was far more beneath Rebecca's surface than I had ever guessed. Our daughter's sobs tore through me. "Mommy, why can't I go like Emma?" she cried. "Did I do something bad? Why don't they want to play with me anymore?" Rebecca held her close, stroking her hair, whispering softly that everything would be okay. But her jaw was clenched in a way I'd never seen before. Later that night, after Laura fell asleep, Rebecca looked at me with a calm, steely focus. "Marianne crossed a line," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's time to put an end to this." The way she said "I'd a broken bar," it gave me chills. Not fear, just a deep certainty that she meant every word. I still had no clue what she was planning, but whatever it was, she wasn't going to let this go unanswered. The very next morning, we received a knock at the door. A tired-looking man in a cheap suit handed us a packet. Marianne had officially filed a lawsuit. According to the documents, she was accusing Rebecca of posing a public threat, carrying a concealed weapon, inciting fear in the community, and she was demanding damages, legal fees, and of course her removal from Pine Lake. Reading through it made my stomach twist. But Rebecca? She barely blinked. She calmly flipped through the papers and nodded like she'd been expecting every single word. I already contacted the FBI legal office, she said casually, and I've retained a local attorney with experience in civil overreach cases. Did the FBI? I stared at her. Why would someone in filing and data entry have access to the FBI's legal department? I asked. She gave me a small, knowing smile. You'll understand soon, she said. Rebecca broken bar. This is serious, I whispered. The fear of legal ruin, of public embarrassment, of losing our home. It was overwhelming. But Rebecca looked straight at me, her voice steady and firm. Don't worry, Marianne's about to learn a lesson she'll never forget. And the thing was, I believed her. I didn't know how she was going to win, but in that moment, I stopped doubting she would. What happens when someone obsessed with control goes head-to-head with someone who actually has it? Let me ask you, have you ever seen someone so confident in their power, they don't even notice the cliff they're walking off? Because Marianne was about to fire hard. Trial day arrived faster than I imagined, and I won't lie, I was a wreck. Couldn't eat, couldn't sit still. I kept pacing like I was waiting for a bomb to go off. But Rebecca? She was the picture of composure. Calm, focused. She moved through her routine like it was any other day. Showered, dressed in a modest, professional outfit, checked her bag one final time, and turned to me with that same cool confidence. It's time, she said, giving me a reassuring smile. Let's not be late. Rebecca's voice was steady as she reminded me, punctuality matters in legal proceedings. There was a quiet authority behind those words, an eerie calm that felt almost unreal, especially considering we were walking into a courtroom battle against a woman who'd turned our lives upside down. I couldn't wrap my head around how my wife, accused of being a public menace, was moving with the quiet assurance of someone who had nothing to fear. It was like she knew something no one else in the room did. The courthouse itself wasn't anything special, just a small, slightly outdated brick building with a creaky old sign out front. But that day, it felt like a stage set for the trial of the year. The courtroom was packed, not just with Pine Lake residents, but with people from nearby towns who had caught wind of the gun-toting government worker versus HOA president drama. The local news had labeled it a bizarre safety story, and 2 camera crews had shown up to document the spectacle. Then Marianne entered, making an entrance so theatrical it could have been scripted. She wore all black, like she was mourning the death of community decency or something, flanked by supporters carrying thick binders labeled evidence. She walked in like a queen, expecting to see her enemies grovel before her. Her smug expression was unbearably, she was practically glowing with anticipation, certain she was about to publicly annihilate us. Then the judge arrived. Judge Patricia Wells was not the type to suffer fools. Mid-50s, professional gray bun, and a glare sharp enough to cut steel. She had a reputation for being fair but absolutely ruthless when it came to people weaponizing the legal system for personal drama. As she flipped through the case file, I caught her pausing, raising one eyebrow at something in the paperwork. Whether that meant trouble for us or for Marianne, I couldn't tell, but it definitely made me nervous. Marianne, on the other hand, looked like she was savoring the moment. She leaned toward her entourage and whispered, "Watch how I take her down. These nobodies won't know what hit them." Then it began. Marianne stood and launched into a performance that deserved an award. Hands trembling, voice cracking, she delivered a tearful speech about how she'd feared for her life. She painted Rebecca as a dangerous federal menace who had deliberately threatened her and used a clearly concealed firearm to intimidate the entire neighborhood. "Your Honor," she choked out, "I couldn't sleep knowing someone like her was living so close to our families." She flashed that weapon to silence me. Her lawyer backed it up with a barrage of evidence. Oversized, low-quality photos cropped to make Rebecca's bag look like some tactical gear. Diagrams filled with arrows and notes made the bag seem like a security threat. They even had a dramatized timeline, suggesting Rebecca had been engaging in suspicious activity for weeks, like sitting quietly by the lake with her bag was a coded operation. Witnesses testified, mostly people Marianne had clearly pressured. Even poor Mrs. Ashley took the stand, visibly shaken and hesitant, but still confirmed she had concerns about the situation. She looked miserable lying under oath, but it was obvious Marianne's influence was too strong to challenge. And yet, some people in the room were buying it. I could hear murmurs of support. Marianne had spun this tale so expertly, she'd turned paranoia into a performance art. I began to worry we might actually lose. Rebecca sat quietly beside me, wearing the expression of someone who felt entirely out of their depth, just a paper pusher dragged into a nightmare she didn't understand. She looked nervous, anxious, a broken bar, exactly how she was supposed to look. Our lawyer, thankfully, was quietly preparing for his turn. When it was time for our defense, he didn't rely on drama, he relied on facts. First, he displayed clear, properly lit photos of Rebecca's bag. No cropping, no eerie shadows, just a standard laptop bag with some folders and office materials. Then came our own witnesses, neighbors who knew us well, who spoke about Laura playing with their kids, about how we'd never once caused a disturbance in the community. The bag photos, debunked. The evidence, revealed to be distorted images taken with long lenses and manipulated with dramatic lighting. Piece by piece, Marianne's whole fantasy started to crumble. Her elaborate house of cards didn't stand up to actual scrutiny. Then our attorney paused and looked at the judge. Your Honor, to fully understand the context of these accusations, we believe the court needs to know the nature of my client's professional background. He turned to Rebecca. Mrs. Rebecca, would you kindly state your current occupation for the record? Rebecca stood up, and right then, I swear the entire air in the courtroom shifted. The quiet, nervous woman beside me disappeared, and in her place stood someone, a broken bar, different, poised, collected, commanding. The nervous, mild-mannered office worker who had sat beside me for weeks was gone. In her place stood a woman who radiated calm authority, someone clearly used to far more serious situations than angry neighborhood meetings and HOA complaints. Rebecca's posture straightened, her eyes locked on Marianne with unnerving steadiness. When she addressed Judge Wells, her voice was clear, firm, and carried like a bell across the courtroom. Your Honor, she said without a hint of hesitation, I am a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The reaction was instantaneous. You could almost feel the collective gasp ripple through the room. Judge Wells, mid-sip from her coffee cup, choked and sprayed the contents across her desk. She fumbled for napkins, trying to recover some semblance of dignity, but quickly lost the battle to an uncontrollable fit of laughter. Not polite laughter, not a chuckle, this was full-on, shoulders shaking, tears down her face, courtroom echoing laughter. Marianne looked like she'd been struck by a freight train. Her face went from smug to ghostly white, then flushed crimson, and back to pale again. Her jaw dropped open in sheer disbelief. Even her lawyer was stunned. The papers slipped from his hands, scattering everywhere as he muttered, "Oh my God," loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. The entire room was now buzzing with shock and disbelief. People were whispering, some pulling out their phones to record what had just become the most unforgettable HOA dispute in history. Mrs. Ashley sat frozen, covering her mouth in horror as the realization dawned she'd helped lead a campaign against a federal agent. Meanwhile, I was sitting there, just as blindsided as everyone else. A broken bar, and I was married to her. Rebecca didn't waver for a second. Her voice, composed and unshaken, carried the weight of authority only someone with years in federal law enforcement could possess. The item in question, she said, is a standard issue FBI document case containing secured materials. I've worked in federal law enforcement for 15 years. I assure this court I understand firearm protocol far better than the average citizen. Judge Wells was still trying to recover from the shock, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Well, she said, fighting off another wave of giggles, in 25 years on this bench, I've seen a load of broken bar, but this is a first. Mrs. Stoney, you're saying you felt threatened by an FBI agent's briefcase? The sheer disbelief in her tone said it all. With that one remark, the entire foundation of Marianne's case crumbled in front of everyone. People in the audience were murmuring, clearly trying to distance themselves from the woman who had just tried to bring down a federal agent with a conspiracy built on shadows and paranoia. So broken bar, how do you think someone reacts when they realize they've just launched a legal attack against the last person they should have messed with? Drop your guesses in the comments. So what do you think was going through Marianne's head in that exact moment, if it weren't for the judge still trying not to laugh and Marianne making these high-pitched, wheezing noises like a balloon losing air? The silence in that courtroom would have been absolute. But Rebecca wasn't done, not even close. What happened next felt like watching a master tactician unveil her trap after letting the enemy march confidently into it. The woman I thought was just a soft-spoken form processor stood tall, exuding the calm precision of someone used to dealing with criminals, not cranky neighbors. She reached into the very same bag that started all this madness and calmly pulled out her FBI badge and identification. She walked it over to Judge Wells and presented both without fanfare. "These credentials can be verified through the Bureau's internal systems," she said, like she was simply checking in for a routine assignment. Next, she handed, "Local woman loses lawsuit against FBI agent over work bag." The article laid everything out, no spin, just the cold, humiliating truth. It spread like wildfire. Suddenly, our sleepy little neighborhood was known statewide for being home to that woman. Property values dipped. People were driving by our street just to gawk. But the best part? The court-ordered apology. Marianne had to take out a full-page ad in the local newspaper, at her own expense, admitting to false claims, harassment, and causing damage to an innocent family. Even better, she had to read it aloud at the next community meeting, word by word, to a packed room. No supporters, no applause, just silence and shame. And when she finished, the moment that made it all worthwhile, Sophie ran up to Rebecca, beaming with hope. "Mommy," she asked, "does this mean I can play with my friends again?" The whole room melted. People clapped, and not for Marianne, but for us, for justice, for the return of decency and sanity. And the image that's burned in my mind to this day, our daughter smiling up at her mother, a broken bar, while the woman who tried to ruin our lives stood broken and alone. Mrs. Ashley's redemption arc became one of the most heartfelt outcomes of the entire ordeal. Just a few days after the trial, she showed up at our doorstep, clutching a bouquet of flowers for Laura, tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked genuinely remorseful as she explained how Marianne had once helped her resolve a property issue and then twisted that favor into leverage, coercing her into lying about Rebecca. "I was scared," she said softly, "scared she'd come after me next. Scared of losing my home. But watching you take on that woman with grace and strength, a broken bar, I finally understood something. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right, even when you are." Rebecca didn't hesitate to forgive her. That moment, that kindness, turned Ashley into one of our most trusted friends. What followed was a transformation across the entire neighborhood. It was as if Pine Lake had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. Neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now began speaking out. Stories of Marianne spying, manipulation, and bullying poured out like water from a broken dam. The fear that had once held this community hostage evaporated almost overnight. The HOA quickly called an emergency election. Marianne was removed from the board permanently. New rules were passed to safeguard residents' privacy and limit the kind of unchecked authority Marianne had abused. After 3 years of living under her reign, Pine Lake was finally free. But Marianne's collapse wasn't just social, it was personal and financial, too. The court fees, damages, and mounting legal bills gutted her retirement savings. Her health visibly deteriorated. She looked hollow, frail, like the stress had aged her a decade in just a few weeks. Businesses she once patronized refused her service. Neighbors avoided her at all costs. Even grocery clerks turned away to avoid conversation. Rumor had it she'd been asked to leave restaurants for ranting about government conspiracies. The community she once controlled now saw her as an outcast. Her final humiliation came when she was forced to sell her oversized lakefront cabin at a massive loss. With her finances in ruin and the restraining order preventing her from living near us, she had no choice but to leave. On moving day, I stood at our window and watched. She loaded a rental truck by herself, no friends, no family, no neighbors to help. It was like watching the last flicker of power snuff itself out. This woman who had ruled by fear now slinked away in silence, reduced to a solitary figure no one wanted to acknowledge. And of course, in true Marianne fashion, she couldn't go quietly. As she drove past, She rolled down her window, face red with rage, and screamed, "You'll all regret this. The truth will come out. You'll see, Dana, because cliché tilde copyright endings exist for a reason." As she flipped off the entire neighborhood and sped off, tires screeching like a teenager having a breakdown in the school parking lot. I was standing in the driveway with Mrs. Ashley when it happened. We just exchanged glances and burst out laughing. It was the perfect ending to the case of Marianne leaving Pine Lake the exact same way she'd ruled it, with anger, delusion, and zero self-awareness. Not long after, the community threw the summer festival at the same one Lori had been excluded from the year before. This time, it felt like a celebration of healing. Kids ran around with painted faces and sticky fingers from cotton candy. Families barbecued. Laughter echoed across the lake. There was no tension, no hushed gossip, just normalcy. Peace. Rebecca fit right in, chatting with neighbors about school events and gardening like any mom on the block. Her role as an FBI agent became just another fun fact and not something to hide anymore. Lori made more friends than I could count that day. Watching her laugh and run free was the moment it all felt worth it. All the stress, all the sleepless nights, all the courtroom drama. That evening, as we sat by the water watching the sunset, I finally asked Rebecca the question that had been nagging at me since the beginning. What would have happened if you'd told everyone who you really were from the start? She smiled gently and replied, Marianne would have found another way to stir up trouble. People like that don't stop until they're forced to. Sometimes as a broken bar, the best way to deal with a bully is to let them expose themselves. And she was right. By letting Marianne dig her own hole, Rebecca hadn't just protected our family, she'd freed an entire neighborhood from fear. She didn't just stop a petty tyrant, she removed the poison that had been festering here for years. So now, Anna Drama Nest wants to hear from you. What do you think would have happened if Rebecca had revealed her FBI badge from day one? Have you ever seen someone get exactly what they deserved? If the story taught me anything, it's this: never underestimate someone just because they seem quiet, especially if that someone is calmly hiding a federal badge and a folder full of evidence. Hit that like button if watching justice get served made your day, and drop your wildest Karen stories in the comments below. We love a good meltdown around here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Because a broken bar, that's the end. A broken bar, or is it? Anna Drama Nest always has another plot twist waiting behind the next click.